Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace Tanker gameplay for the realistic ground forces of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be featuring the Leyland Chieftain Mk, a British main battle tank coming at a tier of 5 and a battle rating at 8.0. Now I know you all love your history, so here's a historical overview on the Chieftain for you. Known formally as FV4201 with FV standing for Fighting Vehicle, the Chieftain was an evolution of the highly successful Centurion main battle tank and Conqueror heavy tank designs. The emphasis for the Chieftain was on a design that would combine the firepower in the form of the 120mm cannon of the Conqueror and the mobility of the Centurion. With Leyland, the team behind the Centurion, starting work in 1956, the first prototype Chieftains arrived in 1959 and the design entered service for the United Kingdom in 1966 with the Chieftain Mk. The tank was initially powered by a 650 horsepower Leyland L60 multi-fuel engine. The main armament consisted of the Royal Ordnance L11A5 120mm L55 rifle cannon, primarily firing high explosive squash head or HESH, and armour-piercing discarding sabot APDS rounds, with the ability to carry up to 64 shells. What made the design unique compared to its contemporaries was the following. Firstly, its armour profile, whereby the heavy sloping on the upper frontal hull and the front of the turret meant that the armour was a lot thicker effectively than initially stated. In the case of the upper front plate, it was 120mm thick, but as it was sloped at 72 degrees, this meant the effective thickness was 388mm. In the case of the front of the turret, it was 195mm thick, but sloped at 60 degrees, to provide an effective thickness of 390mm. The second point of consideration is that the turret lacked a gun manlet, meaning that the vehicle was more effective when firing from the hull down position. The tank was to see combat service in foreign hands during the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988, used by Iran and is still in service with Iran to date. It was also used during the course of the 1990 Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in the hands of the Kuwaiti armed forces. The difference between the Chieftain Mk and the Chieftain Mk depicted on your screen today is that the commander's cupola was redesigned. Other than that, it is the same vehicle born and bred. Now before we can begin our gameplay for today, I would like to quickly clarify the green text that is currently appearing at the bottom of your screen, i.e. the unit test drive expires in a given period of time. The reason this is appearing is because I do not currently actually own the Chieftain Mk in game, but I've been given the opportunity to test drive it for the period of a month. Now this is not because I won the ability to test drive it, but because I am now, and I'd like to announce as this video, officially a content partner for Gaijin Entertainment's War Thunder. That's right ladies and gentlemen, we've been working towards this for the last 3 years and it has finally happened. So what does this mean in terms of the content I can provide for you? Well, it means I will have access to a lot more vehicles in terms of tanks and aircraft that I would not normally have access to. In terms of vehicles I've not yet unlocked via researching them, or alternatively some of the more unique vehicles available in the world of War Thunder. So stay tuned for this because I'll be able to vary the content you see on the channel a little bit more now as a result. But anyway, let's begin and get into the action. For today's gameplay, we're in a domination match on the map, and forgive me for my mispronunciation, Port Novorossiysk. We're choosing to load all 53 of our rounds as armour-piercing discarding sabot, the L15A3 shot. More on this a little bit later. In the meantime, as we start off in the northeastern spawn and make our way to our firing position for this game, let us talk about the Chieftain Mk3's mobility. Well, as we can see, we are not as mobile as a Leopard 1, but we should not expect to be. That vehicle is lighter and has more engine power if I remember correctly. In our condition, we come in at a mass of 54.4 tonnes with a brake horsepower on our engine rating of 574. Meaning that our horsepower per tonne ratio is just over 10. Not too bad, and this means that on flat ground, especially a decent road as you see here, the Chieftain can get up to its top speed of 41 km/h quite easily. But on rougher terrain or highly sloped terrain, this vehicle takes a little bit of time to traverse given ground. Nonetheless, as we have said, as this is a city map, we do not have to worry about those issues, and this vehicle can get to its frontline position quite nicely. Now as we make our way forward and we can see that the vehicle traverses quite nicely with speed, we open up our binoculars and look for enemy vehicles coming across the other side of the bay, i.e. the harbour section if you will, that divides the map in two. And we notice a couple of Russian vehicles gradually making their way across at the moment, having spotted what looks to be an Su-122-54 of some description. Now we continue to move forward into our firing position at this point, and we're getting ready to snipe. And this is where we're going to use our sabre rounds incredibly effectively. So we start off by noticing an IT-1, one of those nasty vehicles with a high explosive anti-tank missile. The IT-1 is coming across the battlefield, they have stopped, and we put our first round into the lower frontal plate and knock them out with a single shell, whereby our sabre round has gone in and out the other side, ripping apart the vehicle as it has gone through. More enemy vehicles are making their way across, however, including the T-10M and the accompanying T-34. We wait for the two vehicles to head into open positions, the T-10M stops, and we put a round into the side of them, knocking them out with a single shell once again. We then proceed to take aim at the T-34. It appears to be armed with a 76mm cannon, although before we do we try to get a quick shot into a T-10M further into the city, but we miss with our round going into an empty train cart. We put a single round into the T-34 at this point. It looks to be a 57mm armed T-34, and having set them on fire they return fire of a round that goes underneath our vehicle and bounces up into our left hand track from our perspective. Quite fortunate there. But nonetheless, two vehicles eliminated and one crippled. We now pull back behind some cover. So at this point, why did we pick the sabre rounds and no high explosive squash head? Well, what we have to consider, in my personal opinion and my experience, with maps such as this one, close quarter maps in cities, is that whoever gets the shot off first and hits the opponent first is going to be the victor. And there are a number of cases where you'll find you will fire at your opponent, they will fire at you just afterwards, your round hits your opponent and knocks them out, their round hits you and knocks you out. You mutually eliminate each other, and that can be quite frustrating as the tanker. So you want your round to get to the target as quickly as possible, have the highest chance of penetrating and knocking them out, or at least killing them to the point where they cannot return fire. And the sabre will enable this. It has a muzzle velocity of 1,370 meters per second initially, and we're going to show that against the SU-122-54 here. Firing right into the side and blowing them to pieces, detonating the vehicle by setting off their ammunition. But on top of this we must consider that our penetration values for our 120mm sabre rounds are phenomenal, being able to go through practically any armour we can face, as long as it is sensible armour, i.e. and not a ridiculous angle on very heavily curved armour such as the turret of a T-54. Whereby, to give you an example, at a distance of 1 kilometre for an angle of attack of 60 degrees, we have a penetration value of 379mm. Pretty impressive. Meanwhile, our Hesh can only go through 150mm at any given angle and range. We throw another round here into the T-34 once more, set them on fire for a second time. Unfortunately, they were able to reverse behind cover before we could put in a third round. And with our reload rate being 10 seconds in our current crew condition, it means that reloads are not too fast compared to the likes of say an M60 or the Leopard 1, so you need to make your round count, as some of your opponents will be able to get in 1.5 rounds to your single round. But of course when you do make your round count, it is usually going to be a one-shot kill or your opponent is going to be severely crippled. Now in the meantime we're just continuing to look for targets that are crossing over open fields of fire. And what I like about this position across the bay, on the map Port Novarisk, again, forgive me for the pronunciation, is that it covers a huge portion of the map. You can look into the central regions, i.e. the crossroads where streets intersect, and on top of this you have the ability to fire across the entirety of the bay and look across the beach, which a lot of opponents will use to rush across the map and try to get into forward positions very early on, or even late in the game when they try to flank around the centre of the map. You can see in the minimap in the bottom right hand corner of your screen that a number of our friendlies are in a central region and the beach can be used as a means to get around them. But we are there to counter it, and so is our friendly Leopard 1. In the meantime, as we sit here then, what else should we consider? Well, in my personal experience, I found the Chieftain does not do well on maps such as this one, or any maps which require close quarter engagements. Now there are a number of reasons. Perhaps I'm not as good as some of you, and I must admit, my skills in realistic ground forces are quite weak. But let us consider this. This vehicle, with its gun, is made, we could say, for longer distances. The rounds you have available can cut apart vehicles at over 2 kilometres, and more on that in a future video. So as a result, this vehicle, it could be said, has the ability to eliminate practically anything it faces at extreme distances, whilst its frontal armour, the upper front plate and the front of the turret, will be able to resist fire at extreme distances. But at closer ranges, whereby you cannot put yourself essentially in a hull down position for example, your lower frontal plate will be exposed. Weaknesses such as your turret ring will be exposed as well. And as a result, this means opponents with a lower calibre or just lower penetration weaponry can cut this vehicle apart, especially the likes of the Russian anti-aircraft battery, the ZSU-57-2. But we could extend this to the likes of the T-34-85. If it looks at us at a distance of 500 metres and has the ability to shoot our lower frontal plate, we have a very high chance of this vehicle going up in flames with the first shot, especially if they fire an armour-piercing high explosive type round. So as a result, we want to try and bunker ourselves down, or in the case of what we're doing here, get into a position whereby our opponents will not be able to react as quickly to our presence as we will to sighting them. And that is why we're trying to sit as far back as possible. And we can see here an enemy T-54 crossing a bit of open region once again, exactly where the SG-122-54 was, but unfortunately our round goes into a small mound in front of the T-54 and we cannot take them out. Now what other considerations must we make? Well, the turret traverse of this vehicle is not that high, which means if you come round a corner and happen to find a T-54 charging in the opposite direction, vehicles such as the T-54 and the Leopard 1 may be able to traverse their turret a little bit faster. I'm not exactly sure of the figures, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. The T-34-57 from earlier gets knocked out, so we pick up an assist, and we can see some fire coming closer to home at this point, towards our friendlies in the centre, so we just keep our eyes open on the binoculars for any encroaching threats. We picked up some kills we want to assist. It's the T-54, we put a single round in, crippling them and setting them on fire. We wait for the reload here as they try to traverse their gun, turn it towards us. Our allies throwing a round as well, and we sneak a round in just in towards the frontal section of their side armour, taking them out for another kill. Aiming towards the fuel tanks and the ammunition stores. With them eliminated, we stay perched in our position and wait for the next target of opportunity. So you can see how in an ambushing role the Chieftain works quite nicely. Further back from the field, using your allies to essentially spot for you and tell you where the action is going to be coming from, and you can lie in wait with your 120mm cannon. It can be quite a tedious style of play, but as you've seen here, it is proving quite effectively. We've already picked up 4 kills and a single assist, and we're checking the scoreboard to see what is remaining on the enemy team in terms of the number of players. Now we move out to the other side of the cover we've been using throughout the entirety of the match to see if any enemy vehicles are trying to charge across the open ground, i.e. across the bay. Nothing so far. So what would I say about the frontal armour of the Chieftain then? Is it great, or is it not as good as perhaps some would expect? Well, it is phenomenal, just not at close range, because at closer ranges your opponents can aim for your weak spots. But when going up against the likes of say a Leopard 1 or a T-54 at 2 km plus, and especially if you can get into a hull down position where you hide your low frontal plate, this vehicle is incredibly hard to penetrate, even with high explosive anti-tank rounds with their very high amounts of penetration. Reason being, your armour profile is very well sloped, as we discussed in the history, and as a result, if the round does have the ability to get through your armour intrinsically, i.e. in terms of its base penetration values, you have high chances of causing ricochets with your armour. So that's a good consideration point. And with the mobility of this vehicle being quite alright, it means that you can get in some really good sniping positions on maps such as Hurtgen Forest or the second battle for El Alamein. But on maps such as the one depicted here, or maps such as Berlin, it's a little bit harder. Here we put a round into the front of an IT-1, and we decide to pull back behind cover, as whilst they're on fire, they decide not to put it out, but instead fire off a missile towards us, as you will see. We do put in a second round, knocking out their engine completely, and as we get ready to reverse behind cover, the missile's on its way, and with slow velocity, we make sure to get behind cover before they can dunk the missile into our side armour. Nice try, good sir, but that's our ace tanker confirmed as we take out our second IT-1 for today. And that is one key point of frustration you may experience in this vehicle when going up against the likes of the IT-1, or indeed the German equivalent. You may put a round in at a close range with armour-piercing discarding Sabo, and this is where Hesh would be more effective. At ranges of less than 500 metres, your Sabo round against a vehicle with very little armour, and this applies to anti-aircraft batteries and lightly armoured vehicles such as Leopard 1s as well, your round is going to go in, hit whatever is in its path, and then come out the other side. Now this means that sometimes you will do very little damage to your opponent, and the reason we're pulling back here is in case of any enemy aircraft or bombers trying to take us out, in revenge for what we have done. But when the round literally goes in one side and out the other of an enemy vehicle, you can sometimes be left thinking, well, that did absolutely nothing, and then your opponent just fires at you and takes you out instantly, which is why you want to make the engagement range longer than what is depicted here, or at least as a minimum what is depicted here, because the closer you get, the higher the chance, unless you know exactly where to aim on a foe, that your Sabo round will go in, take out whatever was in your path, but sometimes just leave the enemy vehicle in a state where it can still fire back and take you out. And we can see the bombs dropping around us at the moment as we lose one of our friendlies, a friendly Chilean, to an IL-28. We continue to move about here and we can see how, again, the mobility of the chieftain is working to our advantage as we relocate amongst the buildings around us towards our spawn point to stay safe. Now, the final point of consideration that I'd like to make is that in terms of the overall durability of this vehicle. Of course, when you get penetrated, if your ammunition goes off, or alternatively, if your fuel tanks go off, you'll catch fire and that can cause you to burn to death if you do not have your fire extinguishers. But this vehicle on the whole, when it does take some damage through penetration, can hold up to the fire. Whereby if you take some rounds in your side armour, alternatively in the side of the turret, if the round did not have that high penetration value but managed to get through, this vehicle can stay alive. And a number of times you'll find against vehicles such as the IT-1, vehicles with the high explosive anti-tank missiles, that you can absorb one or two before being eliminated, so you do have a margin of error. And keeping in mind that this gameplay was taken in patch 1.59, with the new crew replenishment feature as of patch 1.61, that's always something to be aware of. You will be able to get your crew back once you have that unlocked, compared to what you're seeing here. Perhaps a much more conservative style of play, simply because we do not have the ability to get our crew back. And with the limited number of crew available in this vehicle, if I remember correctly it's 4, losing 1 or 2 members is going to put you at a severe handicap, and very quickly, if you continue to take fire and your crew gets eliminated, put you out of the game if you're not one-shot killed or killed in 1 to 2 shots by enemy fire directly. And when bombs drop around you, you do need to keep moving, as this vehicle, with its large profile, can be hit by enemy bombers quite easily. And they do not necessarily need to land a bomb directly on you in order to cause your engine to break down, for example. But nonetheless, I must admit now that for the rest of this game, we are just literally going to be hiding behind buildings, looking out for enemy vehicles as we did before across the bay, and making sure that the enemy bombers cannot locate us and hit us with their weaponry. So as a result, nothing else is going to happen now. We've already picked up our ace tanker and an assist, and it is time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. With our mission accomplished and our score as referenced from earlier, we picked up 25,945 Silver Lions and 3,370 research points. To conclude then, what are my final thoughts on the Chieftain Mk? Well, this is a sturdy main battle tank which only gets better with increasing distance of engagement. Avoid close quarters encounters, especially in city streets, as you're more mobile and better opponents for target acquisition, such as the T-54 and the Leopard 1, will run rings around you in these domains. Instead, take the fight to longer distances and find yourself a nice hull down position, which is easy to do, especially if you're 10 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation. And from fighting in these positions, you'll find that your opponents will not be able to penetrate your frontal armour, meanwhile you'll be able to go through them with ease thanks to your armour piercing discarding sabot rounds, even at the most extreme distances of 3 kilometers plus. And in doing so, what would be a battle for your opponent is going to turn into another day on the shooting range for yourself. Therefore, I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe. And before we completely wrap this up, I would just like to express my gratitude to Gaijin Entertainment for taking me on as a content partner for War Thunder. I look forward for the times to come in this game and what the future truly beholds. But until next time, take care and good luck on the battlefield.